Hello, welcome back to another episode of Ask the Doctor with Dr. Jeffrey Sherman. Hello, Dr. Sherman, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you? Nice to be with you.
Yes, indeed. Today, we're going to be talking about the second dose in immunization and also talk about the immunization process. The COVID-19 statistics for today are as follows. In the United States, there's 28.4 million cases of COVID-19, and there's been 507,000 deaths. Yep, that milestone has been reached recently.
It's up there.
A it's a reminder. It's a reminder about this pandemic because sometimes I feel that we can forget about it. I mean, not really forget about the situation that we're in, but forget about the severity of what's going on. Especially since hospitals are kind of out of sight, assuming you aren't sick. And it's very important to be mindful that there's people out there that are suffering very heavily from this disease. They're just hopefully being taken care of at hospitals.
Right.
So anyway, second immunizations are or should be happening soon. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of seconds, a lot of firsts, of course, still, but a lot of seconds. The new administration has really gotten the vaccines into gear. I'm glad to say, and they're vaccinating 1.5 million a day. A lot of those are the second shots that whose first shots were 3 or 4 weeks ago, depending on which um, vaccine they got. But yeah, I mean, you get that second shot, you're in good shape. The first shot's great. After about two,
Right.
3 weeks, you're about 80, 85% protected. You get that second shot, you get up to 95% protected. Not only, though, do you get to
Nice.
95%, that 95% will last long enough, long term. That 85% will begin to drop off. If you only get one of the mRNA vaccines, that 85% is great, but it's going to drop off eventually. The 95%, that second shot, gives the vaccine some legs and gives it some longevity.
Nice. And that's a very nice thing to hear. And I'm assuming most of the, or I guess I'm asking, most of the medical care people have gotten their first and second shots so far.
Yeah, that was the first wave back in late December, early January. For example, I got my first shot December 23rd, my second shot January 13th. Um, so the medical professionals got their shots around then. Then that opened it up to folks over 65 in the countywide here. I'm talking about California and LA County in particular, over 65, and patients, any patient over 65. Cedar Sinai, where I work, they're a little stingier. They opened it up to over 65, and you had to have a pre-existing condition like undergoing
Okay.
therapy, being a transplant patient, heart failure, obesity, diabetes, and they would call you to tell you when to come in. Whereas the county
Oh,
wide, you could just kind of go uh, make an appointment anywhere you wanted. Cedars had to invite you to their, if you wanted their Pfizer product, you had to get invited to their
interesting.
with a special email. Yeah, a little bit trickier. I've been down there trying to get friends and close family, uh, sort of, vaccinated, but they gave me the can't help you. You got to play by the rules kind of thing, which I guess, of
All
course,
right.
is right.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's interesting that that Cedars wants to, given how Cedars has the vaccine that needs a deeper refrigeration, freezing temperature,
Yeah,
and
yeah. They were given that intentionally. They have the in the pharmacy stock rooms. They have this special freezer storage capacity. So Cedars will be getting that one, and that product is good for several days outside that temperature. By the way, you don't have to store it in the deep freeze up until 3 seconds before it's injected. It can stay out about
okay,
a day, 2 or 3. So what they're doing here is they're bringing out the day's supply up to the vaccination area. They're keeping it cold still, but it's not in the deep freeze. and then when that day's over, they'll return it to the deep freeze, or they'll use up all that supply and get them ready for the next day. They set up a drive-through for the folks over 65. They set up a drive-through vaccination in
Mm,
the Beverly Center area, and they have the same idea. They get it out of the deep freeze, bring it over to the Beverly Center in cold packs, and then bring it back to the hospital freezing system.
right. And I'm actually kind of curious, does the Pfizer vaccine, or I guess all the vaccines, are they actually frozen solid when they're kept at that temperature, or do they somehow stay fluid?
No, they stay fluid. They stay fluid at that really low
Whoa,
temperature. There's saline in there, but all this other stuff in there that makes it a vaccine, then
prevents it from freezing.
water is a different molecule or whatever, so that will freeze. This stuff at that low temperature will not freeze. And it's
Interesting.
funny you mentioned that. I mean, it still was cold when it was then into my arm. I felt the coldness for a second go through me, um, and and you can tell they kept it colder even right before it was injected, so it's still a pretty good temperature. But it still can come to a normal freezer temperature and be effective. After a few days, though, it will not. But of course, the demand is so
Okay.
high, none of the supply is going bad.
All right. And that's a nice thing to hear. No vaccine go to waste.
Right.
Now, I would like to maybe clarify for anybody watching or anybody else that anyone's going to talk to. Um, I think we should clarify why and how do vaccines prevent the spread of a disease besides the fact of the person taking the vaccine not being infected?
Well, it's a couple things. I mean, the vaccine it will the patient won't be infected. And why is the patient not infected? Because the virus can't um, duplicate and replicate and triple and quadruple and then 4 times 4 and 8 times 8 and really grow. Because the second it hits your a vaccinated person's inside, the antibodies that you have circulating in you from the vaccine will say,
Right.
"Hey, this is the guy we're told to attack." And before the virus can really replicate, those antibodies jump on it and destroy it. So there still may be virus in you, but it's not going to replicate and seed the organs that will then make
Inside
you
you.
sick. Maybe get to your mucous membranes in your nose and cause a little bit of a sniffles, but that's because that's all it could do before the antibodies jumped on it and attacked it and destroyed it. And then once that occurred, then that even that cold got better. So if those viruses are destroyed, they're not going to replicate, and without any replication, they can't mutate, and it's those mutations that are
Right.
causing those variants. The I wouldn't say controversial. The still not understood thing about the vaccine, and it will be in the upcoming weeks and months, is how can the vaccinated person, they won't get it, as I just explained, as the antibodies will attack the virus. But when that virus, let's say, is in the nose and your patient's not feeling anything, can they still emit it and breathe it out on
Uh,
somebody else?
that's the question they're
Um,
worried about.
right, and that is the question. What the studies are going through now is they're taking, uh, I guess, vaccinated folks and unvaccinated folks and swabbing and running viral loads, because we know with a higher
Okay.
viral load you're more likely to transmit it. If you've got 1,000 particles of virus versus 20, the guy with the thousands more likely to spray virus on you than the guy with
Exactly.
20. Okay, so what they're doing is they're taking vaccinated and unvaccinated patients and comparing how much virus is in this guy's nose versus the vaccinated guy's nose, and if it's much lower, you can then assume or take the information that the virus, the vaccine then helps prevent transmission also. So they're formulating that data now. I do contend that there is a protective effect uh,
Right.
in a transmission but we just don't have that actual study to prove it, so we can't really know that for sure.
Exactly. Right. So, and that's the thing about science is that it has to be extremely methodical, as methodical as possible. And if there hasn't been a series of studies and experiments to suggest that something is true, then you can't go around saying it's true until really it's proven or suggested to be proven, suggested to be true.
Right. Ask the
Right.
specific question in the study, have a good sample size, have no bias involved, and fairly study the question and then come up with the answer. You can't just say, "Oh, I think this is true, so it probably is. Let's do this." It doesn't work that way.
Right.
You got to have data, science, the facts,
Exactly.
and then just because you have it, then it goes through a whole process of being reviewed and looked at by everybody in consensus, saying, "Oh yeah, this looks good." Then you publish it and go to the FDA and say these are the facts, and the FDA says, "Yep, you're good. These are the rules now." So it's a multiple step process. That's why the vaccine, it's amazing that it got approved in the year long
Right.
time it did, because in normal times this is like a could be a 3 to 5 year process. It came in 1 year.
Right. And yes, in this specific case, we're kind of time is of the essence in this pandemic, where every minute, every hour means there's could be more infections and more deaths. So that's why this science has been kind of rushed, and why like has been rushed, and also in the case of some masks, or not masks. What am I talking about? Um, that's why we're telling people to put on masks even after they've been vaccinated,
Right.
because even though we don't have the studies to prove that you can infect people with, we know that wearing a mask does prevent the amount of viruses expelled from somebody,
Right.
and so we can
And there's
we
still
can
enough
then connect the
virus out
dots.
there amongst the general population to to get to still circulate enough that even a vaccinated person, like I was saying, can still potentially spread it. So even the vaccinated folks need to wear a mask. When we reach a certain percentage of people who have been vaccinated, then the virus will run out of places to go and then dip down. Even the variants will dip down, and
Right.
that is when then the numbers won't be, then they'll be too scarce to catch, and that's a better time than it is today, which is much better than it was 6 weeks ago.
Exactly. And of course, the variants are starting to become the biggest concern, because if there's more variants and more likely to be variants, then there could be a chance, or there is already a chance, that this disease we're going to have for much longer than just this pandemic. And that's why these variants, we have to keep a watch on them and prevent infections, because we don't want to risk having this become the flu. We want it to just not be the flu. We want it to be gone.
I want it to be gone, but if it's the flu at the end of the day, we can live with that because we've lived with the flu. And if you get COVID and you get a fever and a headache for 24, 48 hours, fine, as long as you don't die.
Right.
Uh, and that's what the vaccine's helping do. The data showing that it's preventing really good against severe illnesses. If you get COVID and you get a stuffy nose for a day and a half, no big deal. If you get COVID and you're in the ICU for 3 weeks and die, that's a problem. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to get the vaccine to prevent the ICU scenario and put you in the other in the category of just the sniffles. I
Right.
mean, we assume the risk of the flu every year. So if COVID turns out to be the flu with the help of vaccines and some kind of herd immunity, then we can probably accept that risk too.
Now, let's clarify that when we say like the flu, we mean like the flu in terms of how a new variant comes every year and we have to get a new vaccine. We don't mean in terms of the flu in severity. COVID-19 is
I kind of
much
mean both.
more
I
severe
kind
to
of mean
us.
both. If we can get it as severe as the flu, I mean, people die of the flu every year too. 50,000
That
folks
is
die of the
too.
flu every year, but we're not, you know, shutting down restaurants and schools because of that.
No.
This, if 50,000 people die of the year of COVID, we're not. I don't think we're going to shut schools down either. If but if 500,000 do, then yes.
Right.
So we got to get it to where the you know the outcomes, the illness is basically the flu. Like I said, we assume the risk of life and stuff with the flu going around. We get a flu shot. We'll do the same with this. And if it
Hmm.
brings everything down to the statistics of the flu and of the how severe your illness is, then we'll live with it. We've been living with the flu that way. Why not live with COVID that way?
Exactly. And of course, this is kind of a best case in the worst case scenario. This is like a middle of the ground scenario because obviously the best case is we eradicate the disease and we're fine, but um, there's a probability that that's not going to be the case, and that's why we have to be careful because even if you yourself, of course, are not going to be very affected by the disease, like you said, with only sniffles and a headache, the real concern is that, of course, let's not forget, this disease can transmit without expressing symptoms. So
That's the difference. That's
exactly.
yeah. That's the
So you
tricky.
know that you're sick. Once you
Yeah,
know that you're sick, it's already too late. You could have easily have infected people
right.
when you didn't know you were sick.
That's why this virus, I don't know. It's almost like too perfect. It's got everything.
Yeah,
It was like ahead of us. We came with this. It was ahead of us again. Asymptomatic spread. You don't know if you had it. Some people can get sick. Some people can get not so sick. Some people will be in the ICU. Now you got these variants that are making it more difficult to control because according to the science, the variants are, more transmissible, which goes against most other viruses that mutate. The mutation is a little bit weaker than its parent particle. But in this
interesting.
case, the mutation is stronger and more infective, which is weird because viruses, if you think about, and I may have mentioned this in a previous show, viruses, if they never mutated, they would, in theory, if you ran it to its logical extent, infect everybody, either kill everybody or everybody would be immune, and the virus would have nowhere else to go. So it would have to mutate to find somewhere else to go. In this
Right,
case, it's mutating to make its host even more vulnerable, which is the backwards way of doing it. So
right.
this virus is just kind of, I don't know. It just makes you wonder, I think.
Yeah, it does. It does make you wonder. And it's also a virus that came from bats. So it's got its own weird quirks in that it's not perfect on humans, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
other yeah,
go ahead.
other viruses like the flu have been with humans for a very long time. So if the flu gets like a major variant, it might accidentally variant into something weaker, like you said. But in the case of COVID, now statistically speaking, there's probably been COVID variants that were weaker, but we're just not really paying attention to those ones. We're paying attention to the ones that become a big deal.
All variants should be weaker by sort of the natural progression. Like I said, if the virus is going to kill its host and be so strong to kill its host, the human in this case, it should mutate to want to move on from the human into something else so it can live in another environment if it's going to kill its original host. In this case, it's killing its original host even more. So eventually the virus is going to find no place to go. That's why this virus is weird. And yes, it started in bats, but because of this and a few other things, you got those theories that it was manufactured in a lab and it
Right,
was weird because no viruses, they're like a step ahead of us.
right,
Everything try to fix, it's the asymptomatic spread, it's the who knows who's going to get infected, it's these variants. It's like every time we start to get better, something new happens and we kind of fall back again.
right. And technically speaking, we have the technology to manufacture a virus, but it's not really super helpful to be in that mindset just because it doesn't make it any less of a disease. It's still a disease, and we still need to do precautions for it. And I think that's a great way to come back to even this question. Uh, should we still wear masks after we've been vaccinated?
Yes, now we still should. As I mentioned, there are still not enough of the population that has been vaccinated. Number one, only 6% of the population has received 2 shots. Now, all we have now is 2 shots. There's a Johnson & Johnson vaccine coming up in a week or two that just got approved. That's going to be a 1-shot thing that's very effective against severe disease and pretty effective against modest disease. So that's coming up. But still, only 6% have gotten 2 shots, and about 10-12% haven't received at least 1, which means a ton more people have yet to receive any. So even when you're vaccinated, I mentioned those little particles in your nose that may not be bothering you, but you could still blow them out to somebody else. It's
Exactly.
still possible. We don't know for sure. You can't do that. So you got to wear your mask,
Exactly.
even if you've been vaccinated.
And that's the thing about science.
90% who are still vulnerable. In 6 months from now, that 90% hopefully will be about 30. Then we can ease on the masks a little bit. We still may be wearing masks for the most of 2021, but at least we'll be doing more, more than we're doing now.
Exactly. And that's the thing about science. If we don't know for certain that something is not true or is true, then we really shouldn't assume that they're true or not true. We have to just take the safest route in the meantime.
The facts tested in an unbiased way. We got to assume the vaccinated people can still blow a particle or 2 out. So you got to wear that mask to protect those who are not vaccinated, because a slight little variant of a virus can enter their nose and maybe not hurt them at all. Maybe they'll never feel anything, but maybe they'll be real sick too. So you got to protect them until everybody's vaccinated who wants to be vaccinated.
And you never know really who you're going to be encountering in everyday life. Like even if you're not near people in a risk group, you might be encountering other people that will be in close encounters with risk groups. And that's why it's very important to prevent the spread as much as possible, because you really just don't know where the virus that you could be expelling is going to end up.
Right.
We have a nice question from the chat. What if 2 variants cross? Then what will happen? Will it be stronger or weaker?
I'm not sure what they mean by 2 variants cross. Is that like you get, I mean, you're only going to get infected with one type of virus. You get whatever gets there first is it. Then your antibodies, get going. Then you get a second. Then if the variant, you can maybe get hit with the variant after the fact. I don't know. They're still learning that. They're still studying that. You had Corona back in April of 2020. Maybe you'll get a variant now. It's certainly possible. But
I think
more severe disease, we don't know.
I think this question is coming from I think I know how to properly answer this question, which is viruses replicate by themselves. They don't need a partner to replicate with. Viruses can just mutate on their own. They don't need a partner to mix genetic code and then make an offspring. That's not how viruses work. However, Dr. Sherman, what would happen if you got like a variant from a variant?
I mean, that's a good question. Variants, like I said, they should be weaker. So, and you said there may be some variants out there that are weaker that we're not paying attention to. So there will be variants from variants, and they may be weaker, but they may be stronger. That's what makes this virus weird. Variants have potential to be stronger, where in nature in the past, variants have been weaker as a general rule. And I'm sure this virus is making some weaker variants, but it's making some stronger ones too, and it shouldn't. It should all be weaker, because viruses should find other ways to live on instead of living in the same host. If it moves on to person to person forever, they'll kill off everybody, then it'll kill itself. So it's got to move on. But there are weaker variants and there are stronger variants, and we were still just learning about the stronger ones. That's what we really care about.
Right. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, new diseases generally come from mutations that are kind of happening again and again from one like proto disease, and then it mutates constantly until you get a new disease. And I think that's the concern that's happening now, is that we're afraid that these variants are going to keep mutating and then create a disease that we don't have a vaccine for it yet.
Right. And that just keeps the study, you just got to perpetually study. And the vaccines may be effective, will be effective against the variants. It just may take a booster
Right.
of the same, the same thing, and just boost the immunity to a level that can handle the variants.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean you have to reprogram the DNA. It just means you may need more of it.
All right, I think that's a nice place to wind down the show for today. I would like to first bring up exactly what does this really mean for people out there watching this or hearing this? What does it mean? What does it mean for you to do? It means, here, actually, I'll let you take care of that, Dr. Sherman.
I just want people to get the vaccine. I know it's a new type of vaccine, the first two out there, but the science is excellent. The side effects are little to nothing. The efficacy is outstanding, and it'll stop the virus in its tracks. Okay, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine is your old school vaccine with a little particle of the virus itself. It's not gonna bother you too much or at all, but it's the virus itself. Whereas the Moderna and Pfizer are like blueprints to build the protein, so it's a little bit different. My point is the vaccine that the J&J, it's tried and true. So get that one if you're nervous about the other two. But we reach a level that everybody gets either naturally immune or most likely vaccinated. The virus has nowhere to go. We squash this, and there's every week that we're doing this, the case goes up 50 people instead of 500,000, and the deaths go up 2 instead of 200. You know what I mean? That's
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, that's a nice place to end off the show for today, Dr. Sherman. Thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you. If you would happen to, yes, if anyone out there wants to make a private appointment with Dr. Sherman, you can call his office at 310-659-9600, or you can email his office, which is in the chat, towergastro@gmail.com. If you have any questions for us that we couldn't get to live during the show, you can email us at myworldsciencetv@gmail.com. And until next week, stay safe.